I have a question from a perspective of a soon-to-be graduate. And if we look at the profile of your class, right, class of 2020 in Harvard, you can see that over half of the graduated students are choosing to go into industries like finance, consulting, and technology. And then there's a very big gap, and that's followed by like academia, health, the arts, and government. And this is definitely not just a Harvard thing. I'm at Columbia, and I definitely see the same thing happen there, as well as at other Ivy League or institutions that we choose to call like elite. So I wanted to ask you, I have my own opinion on this and perspective, but I'm very curious about your perspective. Um, why you think this is something that's happening, and maybe what is different between the students who are choosing those industries, right? Finance, consulting, and technology, and those who are choosing a path to go elsewhere in their professional career. And kind of following up on that, I'm curious what you think can be done to steer the students who do choose to go into the higher paying sectors that I mentioned to become more environmentally, I guess, actionable.
Maybe one thing to think about in terms of, a Harvard class being a resource is that they can be a resource for a lot of things, and they can be a resource for making change, and they can be a resource for not making change, right? For the opposite, right? And I think I think you're right about this sort of formation of priorities. It's really important because as you participate in an institution like finance or like consulting, you start to be taken into its ideology and its goals, and it shapes the way you see the world. And it is, in a sense, the way the world works, right? The way Wall Street works. That is, in a sense, how it works. But that isn't necessarily the way it has to work, right? That we can do things differently. And I think so I guess what I'm getting at here is, you know, a curriculum or a education is a way to understand how things work, but also how things could work and how things have to work if we want to make the world work, or a safe ecological space for humans and non-humans alike to flourish. And that how the world works on Wall Street wise, and how the world will need to work if we want to prevent mass extinction and a really dire climate system, those are not necessarily the same thing. So I think I think you're right. Just having that priority, those priorities is really powerful. And it's an important, people in the education world, that's an important thing to keep in mind.
one question I had, um, which is kind of, I think, a very broad and big question that I think probably a lot of people are left wondering with how to deal with this is like the social movement that might kind of underpin all of the changes that you advocate for in your book.
Yeah, this is the most important question, and it's the question that we really don't talk about very much in the book at all. We made a kind of a conscious choice in the book to keep things to this sort of broad level of thinking about materials. What would it take to actually solve the crisis rather than, the step-by-step, like, here's how we should build a movement to actually, do this. So it's sort of, I guess, a broader picture, but you're right that is a more important question, and it's a hard one, and it's one that people debate a lot about. So in the United States, there are many different parts of the environmental and of social movements going on. People are very excited, and I think rightly, for things like No DAPL, Line 3. These are campaigns to shut down new oil and gas infrastructure pipelines, mainly because they're passing through indigenous lands in the U.S. And because of the way, U.S. reservation politics works, this actually ends up building these really kind of natural constituencies, like these indigenous nations are fighting back because of this long history and because of the way they've organized themselves now. And they're able to really stop, or at least very severely slow down, and make much more expensive these projects, to the point that, I mean, they've really changed the politics of pipelines entirely. So that's a major victory, and that's a real social movement with a real sort of material base. Environmental movements are also all over cities in the US, where young people are. Young people are often interested in this because, we have to live with climate change as we get older. But the connections they're not quite as direct as these sort of reservation politics are. Or, there's similar movements happening among landless people in Latin America, indigenous movements in Latin America. And so I often feel like, and I'm not the only one, that there's something lacking us getting really out there and connected. And so other people have proposed many other ideas of how to get these social movements going. A critic of our book, who wrote a book called, his name is Matthew Huber. He wrote a book called Climate Change is Class War. And he really pushes for the electricity worker sector. So like the sort of building trades. So these are a heavily unionized group of workers in the US, and they work on things like power plants. And you could imagine if these workers were to get together and strike and shut down power plants, that could have a pretty big impact on how energy is generated in the US. And, he makes these arguments about, like, well, maybe the environmental movement needs to stop being so alienating to these workers so that they can, and maybe we should, foster these sort of union militancy so that they go on and do this. And to which I say, so there's some complicated reasons why that's maybe more difficult than it first seems. But I'm all for an all of the above approach. I think it'll take this sort of the blue collar sort of traditionally unionized sectors that do a lot of this energy infrastructure work. If they can shut things down, that's huge. It'll take these sorts of indigenous movements that have shown themselves to be extremely powerful. It'll take coalitions of these sort of new social movement types, feminists, environmentalists, who are, I guess, a little bit more abstractly connected to the environment, but nonetheless mobilizing, shutting things down, all coming together and, I think, making this really big multi-sectoral push. Because, I mean, energy is everywhere. And these environmental crises they're all parts of our society. So it's sort of hard to imagine changing something so big, but it'll take all these movements coming together. So I rambled a bit. I hope that's clear. I mean, I don't think anyone really knows what this movement's going to be. My hunch is it's this coalition, but those sorts of coalitions are hard to build.